Hello, this is Fay Hield, and we're having a listen through Wrackline. I'm joined tonight with Sam Sweeney, Rob Harbour, Ben Nichols, and Andy Bell.
I shall go into a high with sorrow, sigh, and mickle care. I shall go into a high with sorrow, sigh, and mickle care. I go to the devil in the devil's name and stay till I come home again. I go to the devil in the devil's name and stay till I come home again. I shall go into
Ben.
with sorrow.
He's in.
Yeah, it's very cool.
I shall go into.
Have you ever opened an album on guitar, Rob, before?
No, I was just thinking that's the first album that I think I've started on the guitar. Nice to
First album I've started with guitar. I'm not a massive lover of guitar, but Rob, I think you've been on fire.
This is one of only the two tracks that I'd heard before. You know, we first started talking about doing this album because you did this for the Fairies project, right?
Yeah, so we did it. Ben's played it before with the Fairies as well. Yeah, based on a 17th century spell by a real witch called Isabel Gowdy. Ooh, the tune is interesting in this one. So that was the Modern Fairies project, which there were 13 of us, Ben and me and 11 other people, poets and filmmakers and things, all responding to fairy and myth legends. And we were looking at old stories and old tales and what we could do with them. And then Inga Thompson and I had a chat about how we could actually make actual real magic, not just tell fairy stories. So we found this real spell told by Isabel Gowdy in her trial when she was tried for being a witch. And then the music, we wanted the music to actually come out of the spell. So I wrote down all the words of the chorus and coloured in any letter that has got a corresponding note name. Like on a piano it goes C to C, and coloured those in and then moved those onto a stave, and so the tune is actually the letters that are in that chorus. It should have been a disaster and we thought it was going to sound awful, but I think it's alright. It's quite catchy.
Did we do it in the same? Did we do it in the same key in the end?
That you went on and on and on about how bad I sounded, so we had to lift it up a bit.
No, I think it was just the theory behind it was brilliant, but it wasn't the right key, was it? So you know,
artistry has to go in.
Yeah.
So if we hadn't just said that now, everybody would still believe it was magic, apart from the pitch perfect people.
Yeah,
I think it's artistic license, Faye. It's fine.
Yeah,
And it actually stops me turning into an actual hare, because we wouldn't want that to like really happen.
yeah, exactly.
So, Faye, did this album, because obviously we did the Fairy project what was it, a year ago or something, a year and a half ago?
Fairy time moves differently.
Exactly. So was this, you sort of were sort of boiling this up in the background to that, or did this kind of, you know, the stuff we looked into there sort of made you think, maybe this might be an interesting thing to explore a bit more?
For the album? Well, yeah, so the relationship with that Fairies project is really weird, because I don't want this album to be like the product of that project, because so much happened in that project that was just massive. But from my point of view, at the end of it, I was thinking, well, I've got all this stuff, and I've got some of these songs go back like 10 years ago. I wrote one of the songs. More than that, 20 years ago, I wrote one of the songs. And they just seem to kind of coalesce around that idea, that one idea about this weird space in between stuff. So yeah, some of the stuff, I didn't want the Fairies project stuff to just disappear, and I know other things are going to happen from that, so I pulled my bits of it together for an album. But it's not the sum of the Fairies project by any means, because we explored some really, really amazing ideas.
You've had a few bits of artwork and stuff relating to the Modern Fairies thing. It's Modern Fairies, not Fairies. If anybody wants to look it up, it's modernfairies.co.uk, I think.
Yes, it is, I think.
I shall put the link in the comments. But yeah, there was lots. There are other references and other people, you know, Terry Winlin and Sarah Hesketh all dotted through the whole project that did other things. But these weren't. There was only like 2 of these songs actually used within the Fairies project, wasn't there? But there's or was there?
Yeah,
2 that were performed within the Fairies project.
Performed on that final show. Yeah, so we've done other things. I suppose when we talk about the Selkies bit in a bit. They've been performed under the Modern Fairies banner.
Yeah, and there's some of Nat's artwork you've used, Nat Reed's artwork as well. And that was Ewan was on BVs as well, Ewan McPherson. I think on that track actually. I think. Yeah, it was. We wanted somebody with a more gruff, growly, less boyish voice than Sam and Rob.
Well, you only had to ask, Andy, you know, we're very adaptable.
So we went north. Yeah, and lost the proper English and went for a semi-Scottish accent. So,
but I think it's interesting, you know, being someone who writes music and you know tries to come up with various projects. I think it's interesting the way one thing springboards into another, and sometimes there's a bit of relation, and sometimes sort of relationship, but sometimes it can just spring off in other direction. So it's sort of it forms a strange logic in your head, even if sometimes you can't actually see it. So those links come out in sort of complicated ways, I think sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll tend to gather a load of material together and find the themes in them and then build those themes out. So I was quite sensitive about the Modern Fairies project. So I very much wanted this not to be a Modern Fairies album. But obviously, as it's come through, so much of it is related to it that connection's felt stronger. But at the beginning, it was very much a Fay Hield album.
But then it's also, I think it's interesting how a song that maybe you wrote 20 years ago, you know, you're doing this material and suddenly you go, that feels like it's got a link with this somehow, and how that suddenly becomes relevant to this project.
Yeah, and I think that's because this is my bits out of the Fairies project, and somebody else would find other stuff in their back catalogues that is relevant to them, because I think you do probably spiral round similar ideas.
That's what I'm saying. I think that's the way the artistic process works. You know, there's not always any logic to it, and sometimes things just form connections in your head.
Smoke and mirrors, Ben, smoke and mirrors.
Little bird upon the bush and little bird.
Interesting thing about this one, to Jenny Wren, is that that's the nickname for Jenny Sturgeon, Hudson Records artist, who's just about to release her album, Jenny Wren.
What a nice little label connection.
I was like, Jenny, I've only just put 2 and 2 together that Faye's written a song about you.
Wow. This
Pre-order
was
now.
going to be called Little Bird until Sam just repeatedly called it Yellow Bird in rehearsals. Yellow Bird!
and that's gonna stay once we get to touring it. This will always
That
be
was the
going
moment. Because I moved from the Modern Fairies project into making this album. And Sam, Rob and I have worked together since my first solo album. And then the Fairies project was a bit of a departure. And we came back to that rehearsal after, it's been a couple of years of not touring together, and we just sat in Rob's living room, and it's like, okay, back in the room, Yellow Bird. It's just, there's no mistake in that little dynamic.
So Faye, is this your this is the first banjo track on the album, isn't it? And, you know, it's interesting, you know, having worked with you on a few things over the last few years. How do you feel playing banjo has changed everything for you? Or has it changed nothing?
Well, she has a banjo. She has a banjo tech everywhere. Go everywhere.
I wish. How has it changed things? Well, it hasn't changed things a lot, to be honest. Well, one thing it's changed is that I think I can do solo gigs because I can play the banjo. The thought of a whole solo gig a cappella, no. Nobody would enjoy that. Well, about 5 people would enjoy that.
Probably 5 people who are watching right now as well. Going, no, I'd definitely enjoy that.
I think it's an interesting thing where, you know, playing an instrument, because certainly if I'm playing an instrument and singing at the same time, it's a very different thing to when I'm just playing an instrument. And I wondered whether that's had any effect on how you sing things and, you know, how you put the arrangements together and all of that?
I've written things, so I tend to only play banjo on the tracks that I wrote on banjo. I haven't yet learned to track on banjo, so that'll be an interesting move over. So this tune was a banjo tune, and then I put the words to it. But that's not a massive change because I've written songs on piano before. I don't really play the piano, but sometimes I'll write songs just orally in my head, and then sometimes I use an instrument. So it is the first, that the banjo dictated the tune for that. As it did for this as well. And because I've written the tunes for a few of these, this one and the pig song as well that we'll get in a minute, some of the chords are a little bit weird and interesting. I certainly wouldn't have written this tune as a vocal melody, but after buying the banjo I just sort of play around with it, and I'm not a classically trained musician by any means, and so, you know, I know where a few chords are, but it's mostly just making noise.
Is anyone classically trained in the banjo?
People are classically trained.
Yeah.
Well, people understand chords and which major and minors and relative minors and which progressions go where, and you know, and you get the. I understand it all on an academic level, on your perfect cadences and and that classical music education, doesn't matter what instrument you're playing, you will transpose it over. But I don't have that knowledge on an instrument.
The banjo is great though for making chords make sense, and like those relationships between chords on the banjo work in a really intuitive way, whereas something like a piano is so linear, you know. So I think the banjo is great for that.
And I think the banjo is also good because it's very good at doing this kind of grey area between harmony, tune and rhythm, where it's sort of doing all of them, but they're all sort of merged into a sort of thing.
See, when I write on the banjo, I've got a very clear. My fingers don't necessarily do what my brain says, so I know in my head what it sounds like. So, Rob and Sam, I suppose, what's it like for me to bring a bit of that banjo sound to you? How do you make sense of that musically?
Well, there was a thing, particularly with the previous track, actually, with Jenny Wren and a few others, where the biggest challenge of sort of arranging stuff with the banjo is to stop it sounding American. You know, there's some real obvious kind of American bluegrassy, old-timey kind of progressions that the banjo just draws you into. So suddenly we were having to find tricks to avoid that being a big part of the sound, you know, like some of those fiddle open tunings and different chord voicings and stuff. So that's the thing.
Definitely for like Jenny Wren.
Yeah.
But something like this one or the pig song, like you're very clever at working things out musically and communicating with each other through sound and not words, and so sometimes I don't know what's going on in your head. So, like, was it clear what the chords were in this, or how did you find it?
There were a couple of moments. Sorry. There were a couple of moments in this where Rob and I, not this track specifically, but on the record where Rob and I definitely heard where the chord that you were implying was totally different. I mean, I have to say on this album, because like when you sent the demos through, I was really excited. You know, when you sent through your bedroom demo
compared to the other ones.
No, but
compared to the previous albums, I was really excited.
Yeah. No, genuinely excited because of that kind of slight leaning, the sonic leaning towards some American stuff, which is very much a thing that I love. But when it came to playing it as a trio in my old house, and did we have 2 days? Yeah, we had one day at my house, one day at Rob's house, didn't we? And I think that Rob, very talented gentleman that he is, was very much more able to translate what you did into the kind of non-American sound world that we were just talking about, whereas I kind of felt like it was much more difficult for me to slot into the sound world. So I feel like it kind of went Fay demos, and then Rob had quite a big hand in where it kind of went chordally.
But interestingly, like as well, I think that we so I've just been doing an album this last week with Lucy Farrell from the Modern Fairies project, and we got...
Is she on Hudson Records, Andy?
She is, funnily enough, yeah. And Chris Drever came down and worked on it.
He's not on
so
Hudson Records.
He's not. Well, he is on Lucy's album. And so he came down and helped out with it, and he's sort of been doing a lot. And Lucy writes all her stuff on a tenor guitar, which is brilliant, because it's as Tom Lenthal, the Brummie Bon Iver, said, it's very satisfying instrument to play, because you can create really satisfying sounds and progressions and stuff without necessarily... I'm not suggesting Lucy doesn't know what she's playing, but without really knowing what the chordal structure or the harmonic structure of what you're doing is. And it is similar on the banjo. And what was interesting was that Chris then added... there were some points when he was putting chords on where I was like, that is not what I was hearing at all. And then there's other points where he's putting chords on going where I was like, that's not what I was hearing, but that's absolutely amazing. And how you can imply that on stuff is quite interesting, isn't it?
Tenor guitar and banjo are quite similar, because they... Yeah. If you've got the range of instruments, they're just in this bit up here.
Yeah, but also...
So they're kind of... It's the same thing.
But also my wider point was that I was just about to compliment you, Ben, was that when you came in the studio, I don't even know if you'd had any rehearsals before, I can't remember. You just came in for a day or something and a couple of days towards the end of the session and put some bass on as a couple of overdubs, and then you did a few, I can't remember how many, 3 or 4 songs live as well, that we decided we needed to be part of, the ensemble. And a lot of the time it was like, for me, was like, oh yeah, we need something to root those chords at that point. And obviously that was the bass, and obviously Concertina can do that to a certain extent. Guitar can do it brilliantly, but Concertina can do it to a certain extent, but to really feel like it's rooted and progressions and stuff were there, is get Big Ben in to do some bass, and and half the time I found myself saying, great, but we need something that really kind of solidifies this part,
So the thing with the banjo is that just play the main 4 strings, not the drone string, and what you've got is a not really rooted chord. You've got a second inversion chord, so it's always asking for the low root note. And the concertina can do it to a certain degree, but the bass or guitar or both really sit underneath the banjo and give it some room. But because all the notes on the banjo are so close together, it does mean you can push them into different inversions and so on. But we were all in the same...
Weird, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, the other thing is we were all in the same range. Concertina, fiddle, banjo are all very much mid-rangey things, so we were sort of trying to find other spaces all through this record.
And that you can change the inversions, and it makes such a big difference to how something sounds. And even if I don't understand, they've done a second inversion there rather than the blah, 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 I know it's different to either what I can hear or what happened before. So that was a bit weird for me on this project, because some of the songs, a lot of them actually, had been played with other people on the Fairies project who'd heard them in one way, and then we came and they were heard in another. And I can be quite slow with change. We're all familiar with that. And it's not that I don't like something, but if it's different, it takes me a little while to get my head around it, and I can furrow my brow a little bit. And I've learned to not just dismiss something because it's different, but let it have a bit of space. But it's... I think that's been part of the joy for this album for me, that we rehearsed it and recorded it very fast, but the material had been bubbling in lots of different formats, so it's almost like catching a snapshot of these songs rather than it being the perfect interpretation of all these songs, and that they can be performed very differently in different formats.
Interestingly, that was something that we talked about early on, was me and you, Faye, that what did you want out of this next album, and what were you going to do? And lots of the previous iterations of what you're going to do were sort of slightly kind of bigger and we were gonna build this sort of bigger thing and everything. And this one, I remember saying to you, like, why don't we do something that you're just gonna enjoy going out and playing, and you're actually gonna, not that you didn't enjoy it before, but you're really gonna like love creating and being part of. And like Sam and Rob, obviously Ben's brilliant and Ben roots it all, but Sam and Rob was definitely, like, as a trio, you were like, I felt like that was where you kind of really you kind of blossom, and you know, and I mean, it's worked out really well.
A rose between two thorns.
Exactly. But yeah, I think that was important on this album, and I think you can hear it, like, and you can hear how comfortable you are with these three musicians. Like,
it's interesting because this album is a departure for me in that I play the banjo, which I've never done before, and I've written songs which I've never done before. I've edited songs an awful lot, and I've changed them beyond recognition in a lot of ways in that editing way, but I'd only seen myself as working with traditional materials. Whereas like this one, it's a traditional story, it's rooted in the tradition, but the words are completely mine, and that's a huge departure. So to be changing all that, if I were to then just go to a completely new band, it would feel really weird. So that was too much, that was enough change for me, and it was just beautiful for me to come back to my two little thorns here to give me my security
two
blankets.
little thorns and big plant pot.
Wild Eric.
Best bit on the whole record. Best bit on the whole record.
People love this track. I thought this was a bit of a throwaway track, but yeah, it's a weird one. I didn't think this would get any comments, but it's getting a lot of comments.
Lots of
That's you on the bass, isn't it, Ben?
and lots of singing bowl and stuff on this.
I don't know if anyone has pointed this out or anyone's noticed, but that instrumental is lifted from Paul Storm.
Clever that, wasn't it? Do you remember that moment? We were quite pleased with ourselves, weren't we?
There's a whole thing of song pairs on this record, isn't there? There's a whole thing of songs which share a theme, is it? Or
yeah, there's 6 themes and 2 songs on each theme, and some of them have like a traditional version and then a contemporary version. Some of them are both contemporary, some are both traditional. So yeah, there's pairs definitely. And so yeah, this one quotes its sister song, which is next.
Can I just point out that Fay Hield says the word both with an L in it?
I also say hallelujah as well.
Both.
I like my L's.
Both.
Both. My kids are really cross with me because they spell it with both and get told off at school.
Well, so they should. It's not got an L in it.
right.
I go back to
This track's great as well.
by the river mouth, dream of soul.
Now everybody's just going to be listening to all the lyrics for the word both just to see if it comes out.
Dive away would cause the boat to kill.
This is probably the first song that I wrote the words and the music at the same time on the banjo. The other ones I wrote the banjo, made up a banjo tune and then found some words to go with it. But this was very much an at the same time moment.
Where out on the sea would my children
Bloody love Ben.
I'll take them deep if I go.
I think these 2 tracks are quite, they've got a sort of slightly spiritual thing about them, maybe,
They're great. These
as a pair of tracks.
yeah, for sure, definitely. This is, for me, they're the 2 tracks that really work so beautifully next to each other. And I think it's interesting, you know, like, yes, we have worked all together a lot, and then me, Rob and Faye as the trio before, but I'm going to talk about me for a second. I don't think I've ever played the fiddle like this on a record.
Are you on Hudson Records though, Sam? Can we just check?
I can't remember. Hang on. Definitely, it's not just the trio as it used to be. Like, stylistically. I was trying to make a serious point, but whatever.
No,
come back.
It's a very different sound from the trio sound that we recorded and gigged previously, isn't it? And I guess I'm playing differently. Like in the sort of trio as we used to gig, I was always trying to find kind of the groove and the sort of the drive it along rhythmically, the concertina, which was a sort of a tricky composition sometimes.
But that was all trad material. It was all heavily trad. Whereas this, when you're faced with some trad and some modern, so you've managed to find a sound, and this was in our latest 5-star review, that there's this seamless change between the tradition and the contemporary songs, and that is so much down to the orchestration of it, because you could present these songs completely different and it would have been a massively jarring album. So that's completely just down to you guys.
I guess I think of the distinction between trad and contemporary songs as much less important than I once did. Like, I used to feel like you had to play a folk song a certain way, and now I just think you just have to play it like it wants to be played. I think the banjo helps with that thing as well. Like with that song, we can just be spacious.
That's a phrase no one's ever used.
Well,
I think the banjo helps.
Contentious, really. We can cut that out. Let's just cut that out for the record. But with how we all feel we have to play on this, me and Sam could play very spaciously on that track because the banjo was keeping the rhythm going, whereas without something defining where the downbeat is.
But I think that's the thing with banjo. It's such a complicated instrument, because with an incredibly small number of notes, whilst it doesn't have a massive range at all, it fulfills all those roles of melody, rhythm, harmony, but it does it sort of by implication almost, rather than, lots of instruments are like, bam, here it is. And the banjo, obviously, we think of as an instrument that's sort of bam in your face, and here it is.
Quote number 2, the banjo we think of as an instrument.
But really,
I think in the reality, it's, especially if you're kind of frailing it more, it's got all these subtleties going on within it, which they're brilliant to play with as an accompanying musician to that, because you can kind of do what you like, pulling the different strands out of that sound.
I find it so interesting playing, because I just do what I think sounds good and then bringing it to musicians and seeing where they find space in that and what needs to happen with it. It's really interesting. I learned so much about what the banjo is from just hearing you guys talk about it. I've got a fly on my nose.
It's a really lovely version of this, The Cruel Mother. It's a great melody you've written.
It's not on Hudson Records.
It's on Topic Records.
Topic Records.
It's an absolute honour to be doing records on Topic Records.
It's a lush thing to be back, actually. It really is nice, because my last album, Old Adam, I did on my own label. But the first 2 were on Topic, and it was so important. Having my first album on Topic was such a huge thing for me. And then the second one, I felt like, I'm on Topic. So, it's like I'm in the family. And it's so lovely to be back, actually. It's funny, I don't know, people talk about label buddies and stuff like that, and it seems a little bit, whether it's marketing or media-y, but there is something quite emotional about having a bond with your label. I didn't think I'd feel it, but I do.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Well, no. All ours, Sam has a bond with.
We should have like 5-a-side football matches.
I think we'd probably win. But Kareem Polwart would be amazing in 5-a-side.
Facing off Liza Carthy, can you?
Let's just pause the football drama. Great moment. So we've been in 3, and now we're in 4. Is that a secret?
No. It's just fucking clever. That was another one of those little smug moments we had, wasn't it?
But it was
Let's
natural.
Just do this.
Well, though, because there we were, and the song works equally as well in both time signatures.
And we were doing it in both. We were like, every time we did it, we'd do it. They were trying to follow me, and one time I'd sing it in 3, one time I'd sing it in 4, and then said, let's just do both, shall we? Both.
Did you say both?
But the thing with the time signature change is that the space that it gives with one extra beat in the bar at this point is just so amazing. But I don't know if anyone will ever notice that, but for me it's a real highlight of the record.
It's interesting though, Sam, because, you know, obviously having played on a fair number of songs over the years, like, it's very hard for me to think. Obviously there's things where you've got 2 bits of music jimmy together, but in terms of the same song cruising through, it's incredibly rare that happens in a song.
Yeah.
Incredibly rare.
Very rare.
And for it to pull off, like, I can't give an example where it doesn't pull it off, but we've done that on a couple of other things. Put in, you know, it happened here organically because that's how we did it. But I work in the university, and in composition there, they learn all sorts of interesting compositional techniques. So you could kind of go, okay, let's write a tune that changes time signature, or let's arrange this song that rises in a semitone every time we play through it, which we did with one song, or let's do a tune that sometimes we play it in the minor and sometimes we play it in the major, which we do with this one as well. And they could be like weird technical things you drop on it, but yeah, the skill is how you integrate that into sounding good, not just doing it as an academic exercise.
But I think the thing is with that one where it shifts, if no one had pointed it out, you wouldn't even be aware of what had happened, but you just feel the sense of how the song changed. That's all you'd feel, which is the brilliant thing about it. It's like, yeah, it's a technical thing, but it's just seamless into your sense of the music.
Yeah.
It's worth saying though, what with this being a traditional song, that's the sort of thing that a source singer might have done with it entirely unconsciously, and the song's sort of always lived in that 3 bars, 4 bars, that duality. So it's nice to sort of keep that.
That's it, and I wrote the tune, so it's not written down in 3 or 4 anywhere, it was just in my head, so wherever it settles is where it was written.
Nancy, the old grey goose is dead.
This is a trad song. And I wrote this tune on the banjo and then just found some words to go with it, so it's a bit...
Actually, this is one that was played a while ago as well, wasn't it? Because I seem to remember, did you do this live with the band for a bit as well?
A couple of times.
Yeah.
I played it once at the Greystones. I think you were there, Ben, and Martin Simpson was there, and you guys... Nancy Kerr played it. It wasn't you guys, it was Nancy Kerr, John, Ben, Martin Simpson. I think Tom Wright might have been on it as well. It was one of those Bright Phoebus nights. And I just remember playing it as one of the first times I'd played it out when it wasn't just me and the banjo, and they got into this groove, and I was just like, fuck yeah. It was amazing. It was so lovely. To hear your music just come alive by other musicians like that was incredible. Yeah, this was one of my first sitting in bed playing the banjo and writing a tune things. So I probably had the banjo, 4 or 5 years now. So I probably wrote this tune 4 years ago. And the words I just love, because it's an American playground song. It's nothing, it's nonsense. And their tunes all rumpty-tumpty, kind of frivolous, but the actual words are really sad.
Really sad. This is one of those great... Rob, what's that thing, that Hugh Lapton thing? The universal through the specific, or whatever. Like, I love this song because essentially it's about killing a goose, but actually, like, it's huge. It's like this little thing as an enormous.
It's the magic thing about folk song, is that a little story can be relevant for anyone, anywhere.
I think it's beautiful. The words are amazing.
And yet when you do it live, audiences come up and they know it as this jaunty little song. So I feel they hear it differently. I think it's nice to be able to present something in a way that people hear it. You say something through the presentation bigger than what it is. I think that's the beauty of performance.
This track as well, along with Sweet William's Ghost, Fay, was a cracking, they were both cracking examples of you playing a thing on the banjo, filling in the gap in your head of what it is, and me not being able to hear it.
Okay,
Do you know, so that riff, does it happen again? No, it doesn't happen again.
I have to sing what I think the banjo is playing.
Exactly, yeah. But that's, as we said, you know, it's because the banjo is such a sparse thing, and it very much happens in Sweet William's Ghost, and you're going, no, this is the riff, and I'm going, I can't tell.
How can you not hear that? Yeah. Well, isn't it lovely that we can communicate and get that across?
Yeah.
So this album was once again a Giant Wafer special for the other previous Listening Club listeners that have heard pretty much any album that I've done over the last 5 years, like half of
On
them
Hudson
have been
Records?
done. No, not just Hudson Records ones. Half of them have happened at Giant Wafer. But it worked pretty well, I think. It was quite different. It's quite a different spot to Real World where we did the previous one, isn't it? But,
It is very different, but every time I've been away to a studio, you just have a magical time out of time. Or I do. Maybe I make fewer records than the rest of you, but they're like really, really hard holidays, but like they're so specific bits of time. I'll always remember them all very particularly.
I think Giant Wafer's brilliant for that because it's, you know, it's sort of in the middle of nowhere, really. And it's good because you go there and just, you know, you're just going to focus on the music you're doing.
well, it's a right pain in the arse even to go and get a takeaway is like half an hour.
Absolutely.
At least, you know.
Well, we cooked amazing food. Who would need a takeaway? We ate like kings that week. That's it, because you're thrown there and you're with each other 24 hours a day in, you know, sharing rooms sometimes, hopefully not, but and then eating together, working together, really high pressure situations. You've got to make this whole album. Everything rests on those few days you got together, so it's very stressful, and yet you've got to work together so well to make that a positive experience. Yeah, it's just beautiful.
It's what's so great about the whole recording thing, really. I mean, particularly when you go away to a studio, it's, you know, you're sort of, there's all the setting up and the getting there and stuff, and you're just creating a space in which you can make something. And that Giant Wafer's great for that. And I guess in that sense, it was the same as the Real World thing. You know, you sort of make a space where everyone's separated but they can see each other, and then all you can do is make a record. You know, it's what it is at the end of it.
So on this one we had Fay pretty much isolated in a booth, so you could do vocal or banjo or both. And then we had
no banjo on this one.
No, not on this one. I mean generally on the album. And then Sam and Rob, Phil and Constantina in the same room, but you did guitar in a different space as well, again, so that there was opportunity to do.
We had Wild
fixing.
Eric, Ben, in that tiny little gap between between you in the control room and everybody else here. Kind of fit between these two. Yeah. Kind of like imagine patio doors. You know, for people who haven't been in a recording studio, you know, there's a lot of. It's all custom built, often by the people that own the place. So you have these sort of glass sliding doors, lots of double glazing everywhere, and lots of stud walls, and then poor old Ben and his bass.
And it basically that being in that thing is sort of, it's like being in a like a conservatory that's kind of 3 feet wide. So you're sort of in this fish tank, really, between the. Just about, absolutely. No bowing allowed.
No, I won't say that. I was going to say something really rude there.
Anyway, the reason we can talk lots about the studio over this, and I thought I'd save that discussion until now, was because this song is so bloody long.
See, Andy, this is a bit of a test for me and Andy, because he doesn't really understand, or not understand, but he doesn't get the value of a big ballad. Tell us about that, Andy.
Well, I just can't be bothered, like, you know, I've heard this song, this story about 50 billion times, so, you know, by the time I get to this length of story...
But how? It's a new song? Or do you mean just mixing this one?
Yeah, well, yes, for sure, yeah. No, long songs are fine, they have their place. Just not on my playlist.
This song is a new song. You might, for those people that don't know, this is... I wrote this from a 6,000 word Breton lay poem, so it's a very old story, but it was written in verse, and many, many more words than you would fit in a ballad. So I've cut a lot out of it, Andy. It could have been considerably longer. But there weren't any, you know, so like Tamlin and Thomas the Rhymer, they're great fairy ballads, but there aren't that many, but there are lots of fairy legends, so this is my attempt to put another one together out of those materials. So I am with you actually on that, spending a little bit too long with one story. It was a lot of work.
No, I think it's more, I mean, I think it's more from a practical point of view, like whenever you record these, they're so hard to break up, especially when it's kind of trad arrangement. It's so hard to
be honest, this sounds so coherent,
or splice
because
them together, or you know, whatever.
But they recorded this. I hadn't finished writing it when they recorded this.
Yeah, and that actually helped, you know, because well that was true. We did do the vocal on this in Sheffield's post-lockdown, actually. And
we did. This was my first thing a human being in my house was having around to record this.
Yeah, and this was pretty late on, and actually I think that helps with the sort of continuity of a 7-minute long track or whatever, 8-minute long track, is the fact that you could sing it as a thing afterwards, because I think we decided, right, actually you need to go away and properly finish this song.
Yeah, the words weren't there, so I couldn't sing it, but we
got an arrangement, we got a basic thing.
And how amazing is that for Sam and Rob, again, and Ben? How do you record an accompaniment to a song that isn't there with life in it? Like, that is phenomenal. It's totally phenomenal.
Yeah. It's not the recommended way to make you know, narrative music, but you know,
let's not pretend there isn't any edits in there.
Well, I mean, it's almost as if it's as if you don't need a singer and you just go out there anyway. Do you listen? Does it matter to you whether I'm there or not? I suppose basically is the fundamental.
Do we have you in the headphones? Who knows? who can ever answer these questions?
I think it was me singing.
The answer is yes, we do.
That track, you know, on that, how did we do it kind of thing. I mean, for me, that is very much. I mean, the tune is the Black Joke, right? And it has very quite specific things that would make it stereotypically English. So not just the tune, but I mean, one of the riffs kind of has that half-time slow thing. Again, a fantastic, wonderful thing. But it's that track.
Did you write that?
I can't remember. Are you saying yes? I did. I can't remember.
It's a wonderful thing.
That week was very, very stressful.
No, you did. I'm saying you did, but you're calling your own work like sublimely wonderful. It's fine.
Oh, right, okay.
The thing with that bit of riff that Sam was talking about is it's kind of borrowed from the tune and the way we treat it. Sam's great idea in the studio, but it's borrowed from that whole Morris tune slows thing. So that's the back to what you were saying there, Sam, about it.
Well, it's interesting that you say that I wrote that, because I have absolutely no memory of coming up with that idea whatsoever. But what I was going to say is that track very much was the most challenging for me to make it sit with the rest of the record in terms of the playing. And I think there are moments, like I'm actually really looking forward to playing it live in a way to try and sort of continue its journey in terms of like its sonic journey, if you like. Let's all get woojy. To sort of see how we can make it do what the rest of the album does in terms of having that. It's not American sounding, but it's not specifically like old school Fay Hield English sounding. It's a different world, and I think we do manage it, particularly in a couple of parts of that track. But I think, you know, like now it's a formed thing. I think it could be quite cool to see.
It's really great. It feels like this listening club feels a bit like I don't know, band therapy or something. I feel like
well, because that Lawnful one is a bit chalk and cheese. So that one is your 7-minute, I mean, contemporarily composed, but it's a trad ballad, you know, fake folk song, and that is folky as you get. To then the next track on the album is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I know some of you struggled with this as well. So how? And I think it's quite interesting that they go back to back on the album.
Well, but we checked, because that was always my comment on it from demo 1 was, how do we make this less Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? And I mean, because it may even borrow elements of the melody from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
It's the chords, the way those chords sit, is in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
It's also this kind of mysterious, slightly kind of Disney, whatever feel to it. But I mean, I think in the mix, not Disney, but you know, but the interesting, well, even down to the penultimate mix version of it, I still felt that. And then I think we definitely, even just bringing that high line down, which is nickel harper and fiddle, I think, joined in, there's lots of stuff there, and making it a bit less stringy really helped, actually.
This is the Marmite track. It's been mentioned in a couple of reviews as either brilliant or dreadful. But I think it's important to have Marmite tracks on an album and take a bit of a risk. If everything's just safe, it's a bit dull, eh?
Yeah, if someone thinks...
I love it. There's the words, I just love it. I feel cheeky whenever I sing it. I feel like I'm
if folk
telling an
music
amazing
isn't
joke.
Marmite, it's really boring. In my opinion, like, that's what I like Marmite music. Most people do, you know.
Well, half do, half don't. That's the point.
No, but exactly, but they would like the other half of Marmiteness, you know.
Yeah, no, you're right. I could give you an academic theory for that, actually. It's called the experience
Please don't.
seeker.
Please don't.
Oh, I've been marking dissertations all day. I'm so tired.
It's that low fiddle line, actually, Andy. That's I know what you mean about bringing the high line down, because it, like, those little things can push a track which has got a bit of ambiguity, very much one way or the other. And that high fiddle line by itself is musical theatre, but bring the lower one in as well, and then there's suddenly a bit more. Yeah, it's interesting.
Can I just say as well, that was the one that I pushed. Like, there was a lot of a large amount of argument for Celeste to be used heavily in that track.
Do you know what a Celeste is? We need more explanation. Context, Andy. What's a Celeste?
Well, it's like a Glock with keys, basically, and
it's like an instrument from the gods. It's got actual bells and a keyboard,
great.
and you hit them and it goes ping.
Think sleigh bells.
It's great, but I was very concerned that it would basically be Charlie and the Chocolate Factory if we did that.
And just going to interrupt you. So this was at Giant Wafer Studio. They have one that lives in the cupboard under the stairs in the house, the accommodation bit. It has been used, but we got there the day before, Andy, and Sam, I think, said, let's not get this out because Andy will get really cross. He won't like it. So it was
because
3
Sam
days
was
mostly of
Sam's trying to get Celeste on about 5 albums. And
we got it. And I love you for letting some of this on, because you weren't happy with the jingles. There is a tiny
notch on it, but I'm glad it's not a main feature. That's all. That's all I'll say.
Fay Hield and the Celeste. That's album 5.
Yeah, it's a good band name, actually. The Celeste.
This is that riff, Faye, that I couldn't hear.
How can you not hear that? Because that's all I'm playing on the banjo. in my head. Oh, this song makes me cry.
Yeah, it's great. It's
Good, this one. Probably one of my favourites, this actually.
It's quite long.
I know.
In her own loyal bar, when she heard a dead man moan.
Funny, I learnt this off Maggie Boyle, or from Maggie Boyle, sorry, a bit Yorkshire. And she passed away a few years ago, but she was so keen on people keep the songs alive, keep singing, you know. She was very London Irish and loved her music. And I've known her since I was in my early teens. I used to nanny for her kids, and I learnt to sing actually by listening to her albums, Cher and Karen Carpenter.
Jesus Christ.
Did you not know that? That's where I come from. That's my roots.
Well, that's why we've got some of the auto-tune bits in this album.
Very good, Andy. Very good.
That was quick, that. For you. But when I listen to this, I can hear her singing it. It's quite weird.
Is this this is a trad melody, Faye, or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote the riff. So I wrote the riff on the banjo. It's kind of a 3-part riff, and I worked that out, and then it kind of goes with the song. So when I brought this track to the band, the riff was really quite prominent, and I played the riff quite a lot at many points through the song, I suppose because that was the original bit of music I brought, and it's got whittled down and down and down and down, which is right for the track, and I think the track's right now. So I suppose I learned, it is therapy, Jesus Andy, it's so much therapy. What I hear in my head, and the point of playing music for me isn't necessarily what an audience wants to hear, and so I have to really, I think that's where you guys help, is to manage to translate what I want and what I need into something that other people might understand.
We did edit this song quite late on again. We did do quite a few,
slash and burn,
few edits because
I think
there was,
it's good to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think there was, we didn't cut any verses, did we? But there was a lot.
No verses, no, but
there was
a lot of
instrumentals and bits that we weren't quite sure about when we did it, like even the intro.
But again, well, I was sure because I'm in that concrete vision where this is how I play it. The riff goes like this, you know, it's 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
And actually, it could just be 1.
But
or
I
it
think-
could
I
be
think that's
2,
as
2,
well-
1. And it takes me a while to get my head around it.
I think sometimes that approach is good because this, I think we recorded this, it was a whirlwind, the Giant Wafer session, and then there was some quite big gaps and bits we'll come back to. I think sometimes that's really good when you're making an album. You just have like a frenzy of chaos and just record the stuff. Then have a bit of time so you get some kind of airspace in your head before you catch up with it again. And often that's brilliant, rather than just being immediately mixing it and just going, right, it's finished. That thing gives you that hindsight look back at it.
And that's where Andy comes in, which I don't know how much people talk about this. So there's so much of Andy in the album, of literally placing notes and cutting and pasting things together and moving things that people did. And
mainly Ben bass notes and moving them more in time, you know. Ben, for anybody, Ben is the most relaxed person on the planet, so you know, better
and he was
to
in a
come
conservatory with his feet up.
Yeah, only joking.
But like,
Ben's
there's little
old.
bits of riffs that Sam or Rob don't remember playing, and I'm sure they did, but it's just it wasn't a well-rehearsed album that the band arranged, played, Andy recorded and put out. You know, this was produced by Andy Bell. The music was certainly put together and produced. More so, I think, for this album than any of my others.
Yeah, I think just I guess we were just less comfortable on the material when we went in the studio. A lot of the other ones was about creating soundscapes and making it sound good and all that. I mean, like the Full English was basically not a challenge, but it was like, right, we got 2 days in the studio, let's go for it and let's see what we can get out of it. And
well, that's it. I feel like that's it. We gave you loads of ingredients and you made an album out of it.
Oh, it's nice.
Thank you, Andy.
I think sometimes when you have quite a small band, and so there's not too many instrumentalists, that kind of slightly spontaneous approach is actually brilliant as a musician, because you just, it's often the more you play something and rehearse it, you start to caricature yourself. And that's often why when you record things, you know, the first or second take are invariably the best, even if you didn't think so at the time, because you haven't just got into that caricaturing kind of phase where you're just playing the same thing.
Yeah.
Which
So
I
how
think
does
was
that
really,
go, guys? When you're
really
now...
cool.
Go on, Ben.
No, that was one of the really good things with this album. So
Yeah.
although it was a bit chaotic at the time, you know, with hindsight, that's actually a brilliant way of doing things.
That was all planned.
But now I think it's really interesting from like the viewers of this perspective. Again, I'm getting a little academic in my own head. So we made this album, and now if we tour it, when we tour it, we will tour it. Are you guys going to learn it from the cut that Andy produced, and then we play the album tracks? Or we already did for the launch gig. We shaped them into, again, something new for performance. But then as audiences, the only experience you have of this music is this album, this one track. And in performance, because we've got such sort of broad experiences of it, I think that's really interesting. I want to know about that more. So when we play something and it sounds wrong to you because it's not as it is on the album, what's that like? Is that like when they play it wrong to how I can hear it in my head, and you have to take a little bit of time to adjust to it being newly right? Or, yeah, I don't know. I think that's really interesting. As musicians, we don't necessarily think about that bit of it.
Everyone's got, all the musicians I know have got a slightly different sort of point on the continuum with that one. Like for me, I learn structures, and the notes I play between one time and another won't be the same. And if I find myself doing something that's the same both times, I'll try and change it. But, you know, then there's things that are sort of key parts of the song, like a riff or a particular chord progression, that do need to stay. So it's just working out what needs to be fixed, what can change. You know, there's things in a trio setting, for example, there's things that one person relies on another person doing. So we'll just have to.
There's also feels as
happens.
well that you'll get, like, so I can't remember if it's the first track, Hairspell, or it's either Hairspell or When She Comes, Hairspell, and that was the sort of most full Englishy sounding track. But when we did that full Englishy as in it's got quite it does have the similar sound to a couple of other tracks. It has got a Seth feel, and I think it was because we added the viola on that track to sort of beef it up and give it some grit and grunt, and we added a bit of stomp and tambourine or something.
Sorry, is the grit and grunt Nancy?
No, yeah, maybe. But the grit and grunt is the kind of the string thing. It was a little bit full Englishy, but my point is, whilst you distract me, is that that wasn't exactly that kind of size of track or that dynamic of track before we added those things in the studio. Like we put that together, we got like a bass version of that, and then we added those things on to create something. And I'm pretty certain that when you go off to play it live, that will definitely have influenced that. So you will play that track much heavier maybe than you would have initially, you know. So it's interesting for me that there'll be bits of the album that'll influence even the dynamics or the, you know.
It's fun. I've always heard the Hairspell is really heavy, and then different people have heard it differently. And once on the Fairies project, we played it so light with Mbira, you know, the little thumb piano and jaw harp, and that was all there was, you know. It's like, wow. And for me, it's the bass and the boof that gives that track its value.
But again, different versions are great. I mean, even in the studio this week, there's different versions of different tracks, and they can just be so. They just give different things and what you need at a certain points on the album. And we needed a big stomping track on the album, I think. So that really helped. But, yeah.
Someone's just sent me a track of a recording of their version of Willow Glen from a previous album arranged for choir. And it's beautiful, so beautiful, but it's, I think part of me making songs is that I don't want to make the perfect album. I want to make material that people enjoy listening to and then we'll go off and sing. So especially like the Salon Fall song, you know, that's not an album track, that's a piece of tradition that it's great that it's on the album, but it would be brilliant if people took it and sung it and changed it and messed around with it. Something like this one is going to be harder to fit in a folk club.
I cry like the cats in the yard when the moon.
This was a bastard to record, eh? You were all so brave with me. So I wrote this song driving down the M1 in massive rainstorm with windscreen wipers going, remembering the death of my mother 10 years earlier and processing grief. And then we tried to record that in the studio and these guys were amazing. Amazing.
As the sun rises upon golden clouds.
This was one of those ones where
Nevermore
you just, you know there's something kind of, because we didn't do a lot of takes of this. This was like 1 or 2 takes, so you know you don't want to be the person who fucks up the take, you know. That was a real
Sam was all right.
Just trying to just get that supportive and spacious vibe.
It's a great guitar sound and riff, and the whole thing is, I mean, the bass is brilliant, and Ben, you know, I don't know, when you say grief, it's quite a good description for Ben's bass line, to be honest. But
I'll remember that.
no, but it's great, and I remember thinking, let's not get too John Martin-y on it, but it's just great. And this outro,
funny, you have that thing of what's stuck in your head, and because the guitar part, me and Rob worked on this a bit on those. We had 2 days rehearsal, Sam, Rob and I. One day in Rob's house, one day in Sam's house. Ben wasn't there, but he'd heard 4 of the tracks before.
Something like that, yeah.
And then he literally just turned up to record. So the guitar part on this I was really happy with. But the only other time I'd sung this out was with a jazz bass player. And I had what she did on it 20 years ago in my head. And then when Ben didn't play that, I couldn't work out why. And obviously I didn't tell him what to play. I didn't tell him what that was. It's not like he failed to play something I gave him, but he didn't do that. And we've already established I'm quite a concrete, hard to, or slow to move, not hard. I'm very happy to move, but it takes me a bit of time. And with such high emotion on it, it was great. But it's a beautiful, beautiful track.
it's a great track, yeah, really good.
Thank you.
It's the last track.
Bobbinge.
Yeah, the harmonium made the trip to Wales.
You've done a lot of diversifying on this album. All the guitar's amazing actually. In fact, I was doing the sort of track list of who plays what. You play guitar and harmonium probably more than you play concertina on this album.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I played the guitar before I played the concertina. I played the guitar before I even knew what the concertina was. But it's always been the sort of the second instrument that I love to.
You're quite annoyingly good on it. That's the trouble.
Did you hear Martin Simpson's quotes? Yeah, Kit told me, it's on Facebook, it's all public. She said, Martin says he wishes he could play concertina as well as he can play guitar.
Concertina, Martin can play the concertina without any trouble at all. There's nothing to the concertina.
No, he's got two. His nails are very long.
His nails are very long.
He would have to cut his fingernails, and that might be an issue, I guess.
Surrender ourselves to the wind.
This is lovely, this song. This is by Sarah Hesketh. So the opening track on the album was the hairspell responding to well, not responding, actually setting the actual words of a 17th century witch. And Sarah loved the idea of being possessed by a hare. And she's a contemporary poet and writes amazing things. So she wanted to write this from the hare's perspective, what it would be like to be consumed by a human. And this was the first poetry that I set to music. So there are other songs on here which I've written, and that's my foray into songwriting, but this is setting contemporary poetry, which was very... The words are so different to traditional music, and it can feel very alienating at the beginning. But I loved spending time with it, getting to know the words and where she was coming from with the words, and finding sense in the words. I think with traditional music, I find sense very quickly. With contemporary words, it takes me longer to open up, I suppose, and let them in. But I love this song actually. But like this kind of repeated chorus, that's not something I've ever done before. But it's beautiful. But I should mention Terry Windling as well from the Night Journey. She's the other poet on the project. And after the Modern Fairies project, so there were so many people who couldn't all work with each other, but at the end, Terry was such a beautiful writer and such a beautiful ideas person. She fed a lot into the Selkies thread of the project. And she loves music, but her formats are drawings and word. So at the end of the project, I wanted to go back to some of her words and make some music. And I picked The Night Journey because it kind of looked like it would make a song. And the longer I spent with her words, the more I understood them, and it became a journey that I did as well. And it's really nice working with other writers to create work like that.
Brilliant. Well done, Faye.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Feels like a bit of an odd way to end. Let's just carry on.
Yeah. I'll tell you the thing with that last track before we do end. What's amazing about that track, because certainly the way I remember it, there's more layering going on in there than I remember doing. I don't know if that just went on whilst I was in the kitchen or something, but like it's when you listen back to that track, it really, really sounds like a church organ. The way the fiddle sits on top of, because it's the brass concertina as well as harmonium, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've got two concertinas.
So with those
I use,
two free reeds.
Yeah, and that's the mellow one. So it sits in with the harmonium, and they're like one big double reed.
But I was going to say that the string thing on that, the fiddle on that is, we're talking about the Americana sound. Actually, it's a fine line between sometimes the Scandi sound and the Americana sound. I mean, that to me has more of a Scandi feel. But yeah, it's really, really great. It's just that cross tuning thing, isn't it? Like, well, I don't even know if you're doing cross tuning or you were being clever, but
yeah. Let's drop D tuning on the fiddle. But you're right about the Scandi thing, because the what's that great record with?
I miss Inga Thompson's vocal on that because she sang BVs on the Modern Fairies project all the way through, and they're just amazing. And whenever the album's on in the car, because I've actually played this quite a lot in the car, rehearsing for gigs, and just because I like it, I'll sing harmony to myself constantly. The kids think it's hilarious, but I would encourage anybody at home to join in on any instrument you like and become part of the music and take the music and do what you like with it. And just get into it, because it's there to be made.